Hello everyone, and welcome back to the most tolerable way to play Narukami. I felt like talking about a clan that I haven't talked about on the channel yet before, and so I thought I would do so with probably the smallest part of said clan. Honestly, I'm not really that into dragon clans, but man, something about Dungaree just speaks to me. I think it's just the way the deck plays. It's super interesting. Dungaree as a card just breaks so many conventions that we've kind of come to expect. Although, I mean, a lot of these kind of rule breaks we've seen in other cards before, but it's kind of like the first time we've seen them all on just one card like this, and it's super cool, super flavorful, and just everything about it is really fun to me. And also the fact that it's probably the least obnoxious way to play Narukami right now, but still completely solid. I think Dungaree is a very good deck, and if you are not prepared for it, you're probably going to have a hard time. And honestly, even if you do prepare for it, you'll probably have a pretty difficult time if they're doing everything that they need to be doing. But you know what? Let's get into deck log. Let's take a look at it, and we'll kind of keep talking there. All right, so here we are on the deck log, and I've basically gone through and kind of looked at every topping Dungaree list over the past, 6 or so months, because Dungaree is one of those decks that it pops up every now and again and just kind of steals tops just because of how just solid of a deck it is. What I've done here in the list that we're going to be going over today is a very basic Dungaree list. There's nothing too fancy here. It's just every card you see here, you are going to see in pretty much every Dungaree build that topped. Now, that's not to say that there aren't other cards that have found their way into lists, and some lists will play certain pieces while others will play completely different pieces, and I'll try and go over those as much as I can too. And then this list as well also kind of has a couple little personal effects of my own, but really I just kind of want this to be a very just straightforward guide into how to build Dungaree, and then we'll go over the other options and you can kind of decide what you would want to use from there. But let's just get right into it, and let's start off with talking about the boy himself, my new best friend, Sealed Demon Dragon Dungaree. This card is super cool. It's got triple drive, just natural on the card. It's got a 17k base and a base 2 critical. Just these three things alone honestly make Dungaree just a solid card in general, and he's got some extra stuff on top of that. Now, everything about Dungaree and the way this deck plays is just all about binding your stuff and then drawing cards because of it, right? So we're going to be filtering through our deck like crazy, going to be drawing a bunch of pieces, and then binding things we don't need for Dungaree's skill, which is whenever he attacks, we put all of the cards in our bind zone into the drop, and according to the number of cards put into the drop, we activate several effects. So if it's 2 or less, we lose 10k power, we lose a crit, and we lose 2 drive. Basically, if you don't have enough in bind zone, you're basically playing with a grade 1 on your Vanguard circle. So we really want to be hitting at least 3 cards in bind zone, and we at least just get to use Dungaree's raw power, right? 4 or more though, we force our opponent to choose a card from their hand and bind it, and at 5 or more, we can choose 3 cards from our drop and shuffle them back into our deck. And this is really where I think why Dungaree performs so well, because there's no one single piece in Dungaree, except for maybe Stun, we'll get to, that is overtly just overwhelmingly powerful and difficult to deal with. It's just a lot of little things that add up to make Dungaree good. 17k base is not to be scoffed at. That's just an extra shield stage that you have on you at all times. The base 2 crit is scary. Your opponent being at 3 damage all of a sudden kind of has to think about whether or not they're going to guard the Vanguard right away. And having that base triple drive also makes that really scary as well. Add on top of that the fact that you are going to ideally be shuffling 3 triggers back into your deck, and also ideally those will be crits every time he swings. And with the amount of card draw that we have in the deck, Dungaree is just a value machine. We have a higher base power, so we'll be guarding less. We draw a bunch of cards, so we'll have more hand advantage. And then, like I said, because we'll be guarding less, we'll be conserving a lot of that hand. And we're going to be drawing an extra card with his natural triple drive on top of it. And then with the triggers, like, we're going to be thinning our deck and then shuffling triggers back into it makes for Dungaree to be a very scary card to deal with when things start snowballing in your direction. That's about all we can say about Dungaree though, but this is something that is just really fun about this deck, is that this whole deck just revolves around Dungaree and making Dungaree work. To that end, we go into things like Jaggy Shot Dragoon. Jaggy Shot has the very useful skill of when he attacks, you bind a card from your hand, choose one of your opponent's front row rear guards, bind it, and then if your opponent has no front row rear guards, you draw a card. So really easy to kind of manipulate your opponent's board to where they'll have no front row rear guards, and then we're just feeling our own bind zone and drawing a card. Super, super great. Next, we have the specific Dungaree support card in Exorcist Mage Ren. Both of the Exorcist Mage in this deck have skills that activate when they are ridden over. Ren lets you look at the top 2 cards of your deck. You choose one, add it to hand, and bind the other. His other skill is a rearguard skill that once per turn we can counterblast 1 and bind the top card of our deck, and he will get plus 5k for each grade of the card that was bound. If a grade 0 was bound though, we get to draw a card. So no matter what, we're going to get some sort of value out of Ren, whether it's some extra power to him or just an extra card draw, which is great. And of course, feeling the bind zone is not to be overlooked. Next, we'll actually talk about Dragon Knight Sharaf, which is Sharaf? I don't know. I'm probably making this sound more offensive than it needs to be. Anyways, this card is great when it's placed on rearguard or put on guardian circles, so it counts for if you are guarding with it from hand or intercepting with it. You can Soul Blast 1, bind a card from your hand, your opponent does the same thing, and you both draw a card. So it kind of cycles your opponent, which isn't necessarily something that I like, but the fact that he also has the skill, the continuous, that if any player's card was bound during the turn, he gets 5k power and 5k shield. The thing is too though, is, you know, if you're playing against a deck that likes to stack the deck, this can really just kind of ruin your opponent's day. If you're playing against, I don't know, something like OTT and they try to do a Tetramagus, you can just be like, yeah, nah. How about you draw that critical instead of checking it on the drive check? So that's just kind of like a fun little interruption thing that can happen with this card. This card's just super great. And again, it fuels our bind zone, draws us a card. That is the overarching theme of this entire deck, is bind, draw, and then swing with Dungaree for big power. Next, let's go ahead and talk about our Eradicator Desert Gunner looking guys. Lightning Cannon Eradicator Gong Sun is really Dungaree's best friend. He has a grade 1 partner in crime in Oban, and for the most part, all you really need to know about Oban is that if he's boosting Gong Sun, he gets plus 3k, and when he's placed, if Gong Sun is in the same column, you countercharge. That's all well and good. The real meat and potatoes to these two is on Gong Sun, which is at the end of the battle that he attacked while boosted by Oban, you can counterblast 1 and bind all of the rear guards in his same column and draw 2 cards. So that includes your rear guards as well. So if your opponent has, like, you know, a full column, you call these guys in that same column, activate this skill, you'll get plus 2 cards to your bind zone, rip a couple of your opponent's rear guards away, and draw 2 cards. Like I said, there's a theme here. Bind and draw, and this guy does it in spades. Next, we'll be talking about Exorcist Mage Mew Mew. Like Ren, when she is rode upon, you can look at the top card of your deck, and you can either bind it or keep it on top of your deck. Now, I've had times where I've done this skill, seen the over trigger on top, and just kind of left it there. Don't know if I necessarily recommend doing that, just because, you know, checking an over trigger on grade 2 is not that explosive, when what you could actually do is just bind that over trigger, and then later on in the game, when you drop it with Dungaree, shuffle it back in your deck for a chance at checking it on a Dungaree swing, which is very scary. Next, we've got Mighty Bolt Dragoon. Mighty Bolt Dragoon is pretty important in this deck just because we really want to be on Dungaree at all times. No exceptions. Writing anything else really hurts. So we want to have as many ways of guaranteeing that we have that Dungaree in hand to be able to use. But you know, things like Gigachad are also very important pieces that we can grab with Mighty Bolt, and not to mention our Heal Guardians as well, which are also, you know, pretty important. Sometimes we may be up against an opponent who's going to try and rush us, and we kind of want to use our Heal Guardians to give us some more survivability. Lastly, in the grade 1s, this is one of my own kind of personal splashes to this. Really, I just kind of had space for one card left over, and I kind of shuffled things around to be able to have it be a PG, and Anastasia is not a bad card. It's a PG, and at Thunderstrike 4 you get to draw a card when she's put into the drop zone. It's pretty good. Kind of fits in with the theme of this deck as well, of just, you know, drawing cards and keeping up hand advantage. I was running this at higher copies. I may go back to running at higher copies. I may not. I just mainly wanted to have a very high crit count in this deck, because I find it's very important to be shuffling those critical triggers back into our deck with Dungaree to make his swings that much scarier for our opponent to have to deal with. From there, we've got, you know, our End of Soul and draw crits. We've got our stride crits, because striding is very important. And, you know, we can use excess Dungarees to stride with. Ideally, we want to be riding those as much as possible, and things like Gigachad are very important to have on rearguard. So if at all possible, we kind of want to be using our grade 3s rather than pitching them to stride. Not to mention, you can pitch this to stride and then use Dungaree to shuffle it back into the deck. Also have one crit sentinel in here. This is just something that I've kind of found myself gravitating toward in a lot of decks, just kind of running like a 3-1 split of PGs to a crit sentinel, mostly just in decks where I want to kind of up my crit count in the deck. I really don't like going below like 7-8 critical if at all possible, and so a lot of times an easy way to just add an extra critical in the deck is to just drop 1 PG and run a crit sentinel. We already talked about it a little bit, but we have our Heal Guardians, you know, just super important piece. We've got 2 draw PGs, you know, not much to be said there. It's a PG. We like to PG, and then our one of over trigger. You can run Dragveda or you can run Olbaria. Doesn't really matter. I'm using Dragveda, and I personally like Dragveda because if you hit it on a Dungaree swing, that's just one more swing of triple drive with base 2 crit, potentially more if you checked any other triggers during your drive checks. So this can be really scary to deal with, especially when you're slapping 100 mil on your Dungaree. It's very much just PG or die at that point, which, you know, is a lot of over triggers, but you know, as long as they're in the format, we're gonna play them, right? So that's basically the main deck. A couple of other options that you can run. I'll just kind of run through a couple pieces. There's Djinn of Thunderous Shock. Djinn of Thunderous Shock is pretty handy as well. Tricky in that he doesn't have a marker, so that if, you know, you're ever, at least with Gigachad, if you're in a uncomfortable spot where you would have to ride something just for a marker. At least, you know, Gigachad has the marker. Gene Thunder Shock does not, but he does gain power when he swings, and he also feels our bind zone, and he kind of guarantees the card draw. Gigachad's kind of dependent on our opponent having an empty front row, so that's a very solid option as well. Grade 2s, there's not really much else that you'll probably see people run other than maybe Zubair. What is this guy? Hold up. Yeah, Zubair's pretty good. You know, on place, you bind one of your rear guards. Doesn't draw you a card, so not super important. Most decks that I've seen that have topped using Dungaree, they run like one of him, if any. But you know, he's a beater and he fuels your bind zone, so there's that. Really, where you kind of have the most flexibility in Dungaree is in your grade 1s. You can very easily shuffle some ratios around and fit in something like Demolition Dragon, the Eradicator version specifically. That's just really fun for your opponent to have to deal with, having to deal with like on-hit draws and binds and stuff like that. Also, what I see used a lot and that I've been really enjoying as well is Nusku. Because we are already running the lightning gun and lightning cannon eradicators and Gongsun and Oban, running Nusku is a very easy way to kind of search those out. But more than that, I feel like Nusku kind of works along in the same way as Mighty Bolt Dragoon, in that they help us to deck thin and then make those triggers that get shuffled back into the deck with Dungaree that much more threatening. Then if you run something like Nusku, that opens up a lot of possibilities, because now all of a sudden you have a little mini Eradicator engine in Dungaree, and you can run a bunch of things that you might want to search off. Things like the Eradicator Perfect Guards, Eradicator Heals. Maybe you just want to grab some free 20k shields with Nusku. Maybe you want to run, I think it's a stand trigger, Eradicator Sharp Impact Dragon. It will show up on screen, and hopefully I'm right. Otherwise, you'll probably hear me overdubbed. Just for, you know, free soul, free countercharge. And that just kind of makes all those things searchable, so you can kind of run this little mini Eradicator engine. But for now, let's just move on to the G zone. This is gonna be quick, because really there's only one card you need to worry about, and that's Stunverse. Because if you're striding into anything else, you're probably not in a great spot. Stunverse is really what you use to kind of control the opponent. Your G zone is where your control aspects come in. Your main deck is all focused on Dungaree and binding and drawing your own cards to fuel Dungaree's skill. Your G zone is really where things are going to interrupt the opponent, and Stunverse is that thing. Stunverse just basically might as well be a card that just says, hey, bind a bunch of your opponent's stuff and draw a bunch of cards. And in fact, I believe that is what it says. Yes, that is what it says, because that's what it does. The most important thing beyond that, though, is that he gets out of the way and just lets it be Dungaree again, which is great. From there, shoot, man, I don't even know what any of these other cards do. Exterminate, you know, maybe sometimes that'll come up where, you know, you have a situation where Exterminate is worth going into more than Stunverse and playing Dungaree, because, you know, giving a free 20 to 30k to your front row is a lot. You got a couple of this Vanquisher. I don't know what he does. You got a couple of this Vanquisher. I don't know what he does. Honestly, all the Vanquisher cards just kind of look the freaking same to me. This Vanquisher, I do know what this Vanquisher does, just because sometimes this is a really cheesy win condition that can happen where you've just like ripped your opponent's hand and board to shreds. So they've got nothing left, and it's not really worth it for you to go into a Stunverse. And so you just go into this and you just kind of can cheese a win out of your opponent. And that's fun. Is it good? I don't know. I don't really play Narukami except for this, and more often than not, I'm just going into Stunverse because honestly, this card does like everything that this deck wants to do, and everything else in here is like, uh-oh, things aren't good, I have to do something else, and that's just not a good spot to be in regardless. And then 1 GB8, what is it, Closure Dragon, you know, just makes your board super fat, and that's cool. Honestly, I never have a need to go into this because, I mean, you stride Stunverse once, your opponent's like, oh no. You stride Stunverse twice, and then your opponent's about ready to punch you from across this table. So, if you're not winning after 2 Stunverses, then what are you even doing, honestly? Then we got G-Guards, and then G-Guards are where this deck gets even more defensive in addition to its 17k base. Of course, you got Impede Dragon. When he's placed, you retire and bind one of your opponent's rear guards, their choice. And then if they still have more rear guards than you by 2 or more, they bind another one. So you can kind of rip apart some boards with this during your opponent's turn, kind of force some difficult choices on them. In a similar vein, we have Bulwark Dragon. Bulwark Dragon can just come through. It's a really easy 25k shield, and he can just come through and really just ruin our opponent's day. If you time this right, and like maybe your opponent's got like some restanders or stuff on board, you can just go straight into this and just pop them all out, and then you just kind of saved yourself a bunch of guard from a bunch of extra attacks they were going to get off, and then you can just kind of come back to your turn and do Dungaree things, which is cool. Brahma is actually also really important to this deck just because he'll up your bind zone by 2 during your opponent's turn, so you can kind of come into your turn with a head start, and that's pretty cool. And he also gets plus 10k shield, so you know, between Bulwark and Brahma, you've got some very solid defensive options. And then this new guy, you know, what does he do? Opponent chooses 2 of their front row rear guards and binds them. Oh yeah, this is fun, right? So Impede, you use Impede, your opponent gets to choose what they bind. But ideally you want them to bind attackers because you want to not get punched in the face. What's his name? Counteract Dragon. He does the same thing. Like your opponent still has to choose, but you force them to choose the front row. But they can also choose not to as well, which makes me like this card a little less. But if they're not binding their own rear guards, then he's getting 10k shield for each one they don't bind. So, you know, I guess, you know, you got to pick your battles. Whew. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. That is the deck, and I hope I didn't forget any of the kind of like extra options that you can kind of shuffle things around with. I want to shout out Jesse from Team Ham because he's like one of the only people I've seen have a Dungaree list on YouTube that's actually a good list. That sounds like I'm throwing shade to other people that have done Dungaree YouTube videos. I haven't seen any Dungaree videos besides Jesse's, and also he's top with Dungaree, so I really just kind of want to shout them out, and also because those videos were kind of a big help when I was first building Dungaree as well, because like, I don't know, I've always really liked Dungaree, and so when I was building it, I was just kind of going through and looking at every topping list and just kind of comparing the similarities, and then with Jesse's list kind of being the only ones that were topped with and then had videos on were a big help, so wanted to shout them out for that. Other than that though, man, I don't know, like and subscribe, I guess that's an important thing to do. Kind of helps me out a lot, and I appreciate you a lot for it. And then follow me on Twitter or Twitch or whatever. I haven't streamed in a while, but maybe I will have before this video goes up, in which case, yeah, check me out on Twitch. We hang out sometimes, probably, I don't know. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Till next time.